Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today we are at Earthquake Park, which is a park that was actually created not by the most recent earthquake here in Anchorage, but by the earthquake of the 1960s. I can't remember exactly what year that was, but it was a massive earthquake. What you have behind me is basically some ground that just dropped into the sea, if I remember the story right, and they then created this park after that. And so it's a place that testifies to the awesome might of the world. And just remember, when you think about that, to remind yourself about how awesome our God is who created this world, and to realize that earthquakes and all of those kind of things happen not as a consequence of our good God, but as a consequence of sin and the fact that we live in a world broken by sin. In today's video, we're going to be having a look at the 5th Psalm, Psalm 5, and I want you to read with me beginning in verse number 1. Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for to you do I pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. For there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they have rebelled against you. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy, and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield. As you reflect upon the psalm with me, you seek out a background for the psalm, and it seems like the psalmist is going through some kind of conflict. There are obviously people who are against him, but the conflict that the psalmist is facing does not seem to be at the forefront of his mind in this psalm. This psalm is a prayer in the morning. Perhaps it's a prayer in the morning after a frustrating yesterday. And in that yesterday, there were people who were against the psalmist. There were things that weren't going well. The psalmist had not yet engaged the problem that he was facing. And he just kind of felt bad about it, it seems. What this psalm is, more than a request to God to help the psalmist with his problems, is a sort of values check. You know, I find it interesting. As I was thinking about this psalm, I was thinking about a discussion that I had with someone the other day. And we were talking about the fact that in public schools, you do not have taught local, state, and even federal laws. I remember in the 12th grade taking AP government, but at the same time, I don't remember in that class going through specific laws that I, as a citizen, was accountable to. We were talking about the structure of government, executive, legislative, and judicial, and all of the extra stuff that surrounds our government, rather than talking about the laws themselves. And I think that that's sometimes how people approach the Bible. There's this sort of sense of what is wrong, this sense of what is right, and that sense is stuck to more closely than what the words of the Bible say. We know who we are, the people of God. We think we know who they are, the enemies of God, but we don't sometimes stop and think, okay, this is what God doesn't like, and this is who is really against me, and this is what needs to be my response to those people. And I think this psalm helps us do that. It helps us to sort of check our values, as I've said. So as we reflect upon the words here, we see in these first 3 verses a prayer in the morning. He says to give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. It's obviously something that's frustrating him. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for to you I do pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. I love the idea of engaging the Lord with your struggles from the very beginning of the day. But the psalm does not then go on to make some sort of request of God. It is, as I've said, a sort of values check. He says, "For you are not a God," in verse 4, "who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you." So evil is a very nebulous term. What does it mean to be evil? Notice how he then gets into some specifics. He says, "The boastful shall not stand before your eyes." Is that the first thing you would think about when you thought about evil? Again, we need to think about evil from the standpoint of God and from the standpoint of His Word. And so he says, "The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies." Again, that's not always at the top of our list when we're thinking about evil doing. He says, "You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man." And notice the connection there, the interesting connection between bloodthirstiness and deceit. Is it always the case that a lie results in a murder? Well, of course not. But at the same time, when the psalmist is engaging these realities and engaging right and wrong, he's seeking to engage them from the standpoint of God. He says in verse 7, "But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in fear of you." And so rather than simply keeping evil in this sort of nebulous realm, he defines evil, he identifies evil, and he identifies who he wants to be. Now that he's identified who he is and who he wants to be, someone who goes to the Lord, someone who goes to His holy temple, he therefore makes the proper request. In verse 8, "Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me." In fact, in verse 9, he further identifies why he needs this help by saying, "For there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue." He then moves from talking about his enemies, making his request and the reason for his request, to then standing with God in agreement. In verse 10, he says, "Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels, because of the abundance of their transgressions cast them out, for they have rebelled against you." Ultimately, the prayer ends after having woken up the morning with groaning, he says in verse 1, and with fear of those who are enemies. Now that he has checked his values, realized who they are, realized who he wants to be, and called God into the picture, he then can say in verse 11, "But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield." I'll be protected from my enemies so long as I know who they are and I know who I am. And may this psalm help us to know who we are and to know who our God is.